estamos en la entrevista educativa, este espacio que hemos creado en Educarchile para que ustedes tengan la posibilidad de conocer lo que hay hoy día en el ambiente, en la discusión internacional en torno al tema educativo. En esta ocasión estamos con un investigador, un psicólogo del desarrollo cognitivo que proviene de Australia, de la Universidad de Flinders. Se llama Phillip Slee y está de visita en Chile por unos cortos días para hablar sobre todo de temas de convivencia escolar y bienestar de los niños. How are you, Phillip?
I'm well, thank you, Jose. Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
Well, if you are well, maybe the good thing is to begin this conversation in terms of the well-being.
Mm-hmm.
This is for you the well-being of our children.
Mm-hmm.
Is the element that constitute this idea of well-being?
Yeah, so it's an area that we've been interested in for some time. So I have a research group at my university, at Flinders University, and our research team has been looking at the nature of well-being and what it means to have well-being and how to best promote well-being. And I think some of that came through some research that we started many years ago around school violence and bullying in particular at my university.
Yes, because the bullying and the violence is a sort of dark side of that, but the well-being is more interesting because it's the first idea is to have the positive side of the,
yes.
of the development of children. No?
Yes, I think that's a lovely way to highlight the difference between the two. There is the darker side and there is the lighter side, and I think at the moment the focus is much more strongly on the lighter side. And so with our research on the darker side, the bullying component, we found when we started maybe nearly 15 to 20 years ago that the notion or idea of bullying was not that well understood in our schools. Teachers knew that it happened, but they didn't know why it happened and they didn't know about the effects of bullying. So we started to make some surveys and we interviewed with teachers and we talked with the young people, and they told us that yes, this has been happening to us and it makes us very sad and very unhappy, and it affects our well-being and how we feel about. So we then started to try and understand bullying a little more, its nature and its impact and its effects, particularly around its effect on the well-being.
Why the bullying as a concept only born some decades ago? Before that, you think that the bullying didn't exist, or we don't have a word to nominate these behaviors and problems within our students?
I think it's all of those things. I think people understood that bullying did happen, but there were strange ideas about it. So some people felt that bullying was good because it made you stronger. It built your strength, and if you could stand up to bullying, then
if you receive the bullying, you will be
better,
a
better person. Wow. And so in our countries, I think there were those mistaken ideas that bullying happens, but it's not so bad and it's okay and it makes you stronger if you can stand it. In some other countries, just like you suggest, there is no word for bullying in the same way that we have in English. So for example, in India, where we have been working recently, they don't have a word for it. They invent a word, they make a word now, and one of the ideas there that encapsulates what happens is called Eve-Teasing, which is really about sexual harassment and sexual bullying, and particularly its impact on girls. Now they start to research it, and we have a research program running in India where we're talking with children about what happens in the classroom and in the school around it. So yes, it's a combination of not having a word for it. Some countries don't have a word for it. Other countries do, but there were some mistaken ideas about its effects.
Yes, and I think also that they have this idea that you have a more awareness about the rights of the children. the rights and the well-being of the children, that also is important to have this research and to have words about bullying, and also a research focus on this topic now.
It was, because when we started to release our results, when we found that the children and young people in our primary schools and secondary schools were saying that bullying happens and it's very hurtful, it's sometimes it's physical, sometimes it's social, where we get excluded and left out, and sometimes it's psychological, where the group will do some psychological things to us. They were telling us that all of these things happen. Now, of course, with IT, we have the internet, so we have issues associated with bullying on the internet.
Cyberbullying.
Yes, cyberbullying, which I'm sure also happens in Chile as well. So we started to research that, but then when we released the results, the parents said, yes, but what do we do about it? And the teachers wanted to know, where are some programs in Australia that we can use in our classrooms, in our teaching, that are good programs that work. So very quickly we had to work with the parents and the teachers to develop programs and intervention programs. So that's where a lot of our work went.
How to differentiate what is bullying and what is a behavior of violence?
Yes.
What is how you can establish a sort of boundary to say this is bullying?
Yes. I think bullying is a form of aggression, it's a form of violence, but it's a very particular form of violence, and it involves a power imbalance. So there is one individual or a group of individuals who are stronger, not physically always. Sometimes it's emotionally or psychologically stronger than another person or group. So there's a power imbalance, and there's repetition. It's not just one time that it happens.
It's a systematic behavior of a group against one
person or a group against
or
another.
Other group.
Yes. And so there's the power imbalance, there's the repetition that occurs, and those are two of the key elements that differentiate bullying from difference.
This is interesting that you say that they have different forms of bullying. You can explain more about this different form. You say that this one is physical, others psychological, other a sort of social exclusion.
Yes.
This is another form of bullying too, when someone is alone and is systematically...
Yes. So particularly in Australia, the physical bullying, a little perhaps like other countries in England or Europe, physical bullying was often the way that it was understood. It was the fighting, the kicking. There's also verbal bullying, where a person engages in name calling, and that is very hurtful. But then there's the social bullying, the exclusion that happens. And we found when we started working with other countries, so we have a long history now of research with Japan. And in Japan, it has a different name. To go back to your idea before, is called ijime. So ijime is not physical bullying, it's exclusion. And it's because of the power of the group in certain cultures, like Japanese culture, where the group is very powerful. To be excluded or left out from the group is indeed very, very hurtful. And it became so hurtful that there were suicides associated with being left out of with that exclusion. And I think there is also an element of bullying that is about culture, and it's about expectations within that culture. And so in Japan, the group is so important. For a child to be left out of the group was indeed much more hurtful often than in Australia, for example. And so when we started to collaborate with countries like Japan, we learnt that there were different forms of bullying, but ultimately that darker side that you talked about meant that we had to move to look at well-being and the lighter side. How could we improve the situation for young people?
Have them some kind of differences between the age of the bullying? think that maybe this type of behaviors, physical, psychological, and social exclusion, and cyber bullying, are different in different age of the children too? What is the more risky age, if you want, in terms of the development of bullying?
Yeah, that's a very good question, Jose, I think. Interestingly, we're finding that some of the riskier ages for the Australian students is for the girls who are early teenagers. And now we're doing a lot of studies because the girls, their self-esteem and their self-worth seems to be declining. So they are flourishing less and they are languishing more. They're languishing because their well-being is going down from primary school to secondary school. The boys stays almost the same from primary to secondary. Their well-being is okay. It stays fairly stable. But for the girls, we find particularly girls who are 12 years old, 13 and 14, their well-being and their health, their mental health is declining. And so we think that some of that has to do with the cyber and the cyberbullying and the use of the telephone, the phones, where there's a posting of their pictures and they get feedback about their pictures and whether somebody likes them or not. And we think that's having a big impact on them now. So some of our research is looking at that. So we've also found, to go back to your question as well, that there are different kinds. Initially people just thought it was physical. Bullying was like bullissimo. It's physical, it's punching and the hitting and the kicking. But we found when we started to talk to the students, when we did the surveys and the interviews, that in fact in Australia the verbal bullying was very strong. There was a little physical, a lot of verbal, and a good deal of social and psychological. And that changed across the age range. So for the younger students, often it would be physical. And then as they get into primary school and later primary, it becomes more verbal. And then in secondary school, it's much more subtle. It's the exclusion. And that's really difficult for teachers because teachers can't see easily in secondary school exclusion. You know, when another child turns away from another, or where they use a look or a glance to hurt another child in some fashion. So a lot of our training and our work in schools had to be to sensitise teachers to the fact that there were different forms of bullying, and each of them were harmful, but and some of them were very difficult to detect.
Yes, I think that is very important in this age. Maybe this is an important difference between the youngers and the olders. That for the little children, it's more clear that they declare their situation, that explain. But I suppose that in the secondary school that this is more difficult to declare that you are excluded or you are living this bullying of others of the group, because you can have a sort of punishment, another kind of punishment of the group, exactly for this declaration of the adult world. For this reason, for the adults, it's difficult to know what has happened there.
And that's very insightful comment, because when we were being asked by the teachers what should we do, we talked to the students, and the secondary school students, the teenagers, would say, if I was being bullied, I wouldn't tell anybody. They were very ashamed, and I think that's to do with their developmental stage, that to admit that somebody is hurting you is a shameful thing, because you should be older now and you should be able to deal with it. And so they would say that we don't tell anybody. And so we found that the adults, for example, and the teachers were thinking that they were advising students that if you get bullied, you come and talk to us. Go and talk to the school counsellor or tell your parents. But the students, when we talked to them, they would say, no, we won't do that. We are too ashamed, and we just don't tell anybody. And so that's that darker side of the bullying. It grows and hurts and inflicts pain because they don't feel they can trust or tell anybody. And sometimes when they do tell the parents get very angry, they rush down to the school and they confront the teacher or talk to the principal. And then the student is even more ashamed because then they hear their parent has gone to the school and got upset and they didn't want that to happen. Mostly we found that the students just wanted to be able to talk. They wanted to tell somebody, but not necessarily for the person to do anything, just to listen and to be empathic and caring.
And they want to by themselves to solve the problem. Yes. That is the illusion.
Yeah, that is the solution. Because we also found when we were developing strategies to help teachers, help the students cope, that one of the common strategies was that adults would think and counsellors would think is, well, advise the students to tell somebody. But the students who were being very badly bullied said, no, we don't tell anybody. We engage in, we either deny that it's happening. If it's very hurtful, we take drugs or alcohol to make it go away, or we stay away from school. That's how we cope. We cope by engaging in those kind of harmful activities. We wouldn't go and tell somebody because that's too shameful, and sometimes when we've told somebody, that's made the situation worse. So I think it's really important for teachers to understand that there are different strategies as you get older. For adolescents, they will have different strategies, and for schools to adapt those strategies accordingly.
Can we talk about a little more about that? I think that for our audience, it's very interesting to know how you can do about how to manage this kind of situation. I suppose it is difficult to say one strategy, but at least some main ideas about how can do a school or the group of teachers to manage the situation.
I think when we started showing our results many years ago, one of the things that we wanted to do was influence policy and practice, particularly the policy at the governmental level. So we then started to approach our politicians and we talked to them about how serious the situation was. We showed them pictures and we showed them films, we showed them the statistics from our findings. And in 2005, we had a very innovative politician, and what he did, he was our education minister, and he established the National Safe Schools Framework for every school system in it. So in Australia we have public systems, we have the Catholic systems, and we have the private or the independent systems. But he is the minister for all of those systems. So he established then a National Safe Schools Framework.
It's a sort of a standard?
It's a standard, yes. And he said to every school, in all of the systems, schools must be safe places for learning. They must be a safe environment. The school climate must be safe and free from bullying and harassment, and be a safe place for children and young people to go. And that was the underpinning idea behind it. We went on, so he consulted with people from each of the areas, states in Australia, including students and parents and teachers, and they developed the National Safe Schools Framework, and that is on the government website, and it has all of the resources now that have been developed for schools, for parents and for students. There are 3 areas on the website, one area for teachers, one area for parents and one area for students, and each of those has different resources for them to help them. So that was one part, was that policy level. But at the school level, we still find that the schools have to work very hard at developing translating those ideas down into...
Sure, this is the more difficult point.
It is, because there are many differences in some schools in Australia where we have, out of the 25 to 28 students, we may have 15 to 20 nationalities who come. We're a very multicultural country, and also there is different levels of standards of living. So you have richer areas and the poorer areas, and so the schools must adapt. And an important part of the National Safe Schools framework was that you must communicate, you must have a dialogue with your local community to find out what are the issues in the local community that happen out there that come into the school. So there may be some violence, some drug taking, bullying, and then that happens outside, and then that comes into the school, and then the principal has to deal with it. So we had to develop strategies and coping strategies that had some evidence base. So we had to be able to show that they worked, they made a difference. Because in Australia, perhaps like in Chile, a lot of emphasis on assessment and performance. So the academic area is a very important area, and so teachers sometimes think, well, you know, how do I teach for the well-being of the students when my job is to improve their literacy and numeracy? Wow. And I didn't get good training. So in the area of well-being, I'm a good mathematics teacher, but I didn't get the good training in teaching well-being and self-esteem, and so we have to have evidence-based programs that show that teachers can implement these programs. So I can tell you a little about some national programs we have on mental health, where we found that teachers nationally in a program were very good at developing and delivering mental health programs in schools if they got professional development and professional help along the way.
Well, just to finish this interesting conversation with Professor Phillip Slee, and our last question, that is all the time the same question for all our guests, is the question about your advice about our educational system. You need to say to us, to the Chileans, only one advice to improve our education. What will be your advice?
So, Jose, thank you. It's a very important question now, and I'm always very uneasy about answering that question, because I usually don't have good knowledge of other school systems or other countries. So I can answer it by answering what I would be advising our school systems to be doing. I think it's really very important that we have good pre-service teacher training, and that we invest a lot of time and a lot of energy in providing the best possible training for our teachers. And that training should not only be academic, the academic work is really important, but the training should be about developing their confidence to teach well-being in schools, the lighter side of what happens in schools. And I think giving teachers the confidence to do that, equipping them with the skills and the knowledge that they can be good teachers for well-being, because what our research in Australia shows is that, in fact, if you teach well-being and you improve the well-being of students in your classroom, it actually improves the academic performance. So our government was always very interested in what is the link between well-being and academic performance. And so we showed in one of our national programs called Kids Matter. Kids Matter was a mental health program delivered by teachers in schools, that if teachers delivered well-being well, it significantly improved by up to 6 months the academic performance of students. And so I think equipping and training our pre-service teachers to feel confident and strong and passionate about teaching well-being, that's the key for us. And maybe there's something in there for Chilean teachers and education systems.
Sure it is. Well, muchas gracias, Professor Phillip Slee de Flinders University. Estamos cerrando este capítulo de la entrevista educativa y los invitamos a ver muchas otras también en el portal Educarchile.